Hello and welcome to the Shift podcast, Recovering Active Directory and Entra ID. I'm Darren Thompson and I'll be your host today. Now, Active Directory and Entra ID remain the backbone of identity for most organizations and also one of the biggest attack targets. When AD goes down, everything from business systems to physical access can stop. Yet many recovery strategies are still manual or non-existent. In this session, I'm going to be talking to Dan Conrad, global expert in everything identity. We're going to talk about the evolving challenges of AD recovery and how Commvault Cloud helps organizations to automate and accelerate that process. Dan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Good to be here, Darren.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Why does Active Directory and Entra ID remain one of the most critical, yet one of the most vulnerable assets in our organizations today?
There's many facets to an answer to that question, but I think one of the reasons it's most vulnerable is because it's highly functional.
Right.
You know, high functionality creates a lot of possibly open doors. But it's still vulnerable because it's been around for 25 plus years. Organizations depend on it, and it hasn't failed in 25 years, right? It's the same Active Directory they stood up 25, maybe 20 years ago. Sure, it's been upgraded, it's evolved a little bit, it's been extended, but at the core, it's still the same Active Directory, and it's still running, and they haven't needed to recover it yet. It's sort of like electricity in a data center. You just assume it's going to be there, and we've forgotten about it. So it's not part of a recovery plan.
But it's certainly, in recent years, I guess, become a target for criminals. Talk a little bit about that.
If that wasn't an issue, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today, because the directory services themselves are still fairly vulnerable, but they were less valuable until things like ransomware came around. Yeah. Like you had breaches like Target, and you had breaches like the OPM breach, but those weren't attacks where they actually compromised the entire organization and shut it down. They simply stole data, which was bad enough. Now, when you can steal the data and then on the way out shut the organization down, that from a factor they weren't going to realize was going to happen, or didn't consider a possibility, things changed quite a bit.
Interesting. Now, I know we've been working quite hard on a piece of functionality in particular, and I hear a lot about forest recovery.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that. What is it, and why does forest recovery look more complex to an administrator as opposed to any other recovery?
Well, right. So we're not talking about server recovery or even file system recoveries or even simply putting data back where it came from. There's a complicated process to recover an Active Directory forest. And if you're not familiar with the terminology, Active Directory, one of the organizations within Active Directory is the forest structure. So forests contain domains, which contain domain controllers, which is what people relate to as the servers. I can recover a server, so I should be able to recover a forest. And Active Directory is this moving, living, breathing being that interacts with all the other parts. And from a security perspective, it's like you and I are constantly resetting a trust relationship. We know who we are. So if you go away for a while and somebody replaces you with a copy of Darren, I'm going to be very aware, and it's not going to function that way. And that's what Active Directory does. So if an individual domain controller fails, most AD admins know you don't recover a domain controller because that will actually corrupt the rest of the directory. You need to rebuild a new one. You clean up where the old one was, you rebuild a new one. When you're talking forest recovery, you need to do that to all of the domain controllers at the same time. So there's operating system recovery, and then there's the 125 orchestration steps you need to do to make the forest function once it comes back.
And I think I'm starting to see the answer to my next question, but talk to us a little bit about how organizations who do this very manually suffer as a result of that manually intensive process.
Right. It's not to say it can't be done. It is a process that can be done. Microsoft publishes the Forest Recovery Guide. Most AD admins are very aware of this guide, but hope they never have to use it.
Right.
And the wrong time to figure out how to recover a forest is when you need to recover a forest.
Yeah. So
unless you've planned for that and even built your Active Directory to be recovered, it's going to be a very difficult process because all of these, I say, I'll throw out varying number of steps because it depends on how many steps you need, and all of them need to be executed correctly, or sometimes you get to start over. Right. One organization came to us, about 40,000 employees. They had a single domain forest, which in the Active Directory world is the easiest thing to recover. What they determined was their minimum viable Active Directory would be 8 domain controllers. Like, that's pretty lean, okay, but it's doable. And they wanted to try to do it themselves. Like, how do we try, great effort, let's practice this and see what it does. So they recovered it, and it took them 33 hours. That's a Herculean effort of many people, and they got it done. They know how to do it. And they came to us and said, "Can you beat that?"
Right.
Well, of course we can, right?
Yeah.
So we did the same process. Given the opportunity to compete and race, we cheated. So we were able to recover the forest in just under 2 hours.
Amazing.
So yeah, just because we automated all those steps, you don't have to, reference it and gather the right information to apply. Every individual step is going to be different. So
now, as a CISO, what I obsess about is recovery times, right? So I've been breached, Active Directory and everything else has gone. So, those hugely extended periods of time needed for manual process like that is all going to affect the amount of time it takes me to get my business back online again.
Right. The recovery time of Active Directory is always a main concern. I try to move focus away from recovery time into recovery accuracy.
Right.
The knee-jerk reaction when you need to recover a forest is to recover it back to production from the last possible backup.
Right.
When you knew it was running. I would encourage organizations to take a breath, recover to an isolated recovery environment, because, as we'll probably get into, we're going to encourage you to practice your forest recoveries into this isolated recovery environment.
Yeah.
So you can bring up, say, a minimum viable version of your Active Directory, which in a single domain forest is one domain controller. Very easy to do. In a multiple domain forest would be one domain controller per domain to look at the directory, see what's there, possibly figure out how it got compromised to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Once you've got that process nailed down, might take you a couple hours, jump over to production and do your production recovery.
Right. And then do all of that under stress and chaos, right? Because that's what a breach feels like.
Right. Exactly. The wrong time to learn to do it is when it's down.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've touched on quite a few topics already. Let's just take a step back and talk a bit in general about how Commvault helps with all of this. Just give us the overview to begin with.
So we're basically automating the Microsoft process. I'm looking at it from two perspectives. We're engaging customers and having them realize that the plans that they think they have in place are probably not going to work. And I would even say, when I ask customers about their plan and they start to tell me, I really love gathering these stories, and because there's some very creative answers out there.
Right.
Anything from designing the forest to be recovered, which is a one-off, to designing or spinning up 49 additional domain controllers was one of them. Every day they turn 7 off and turn 7 back on. Like, that's not going to do anything. But, from our perspective, we're going to automate that complete process. So if we can get them to practice this and execute it and just have that muscle memory on forest recovery and then realize that it needs to be recovered a certain way, those are huge steps forward.
Yeah. And talk to us about the USP. So other people do that. Why Commvault? What makes us different?
Well, because we're doing it, we're a data protection company, first off, right? So we know how to protect data. We're doing our forest recovery on the underlying Commvault platform. Right. And, whether that's software or SaaS, I'm definitely a fan of the SaaS solution in Active Directory forest recovery, but it's all built into our platform. So we're using things like immutable storage, threat scan underneath. And if you don't have an isolated recovery environment to practice to, we've got Cleanroom. We'll probably have a discussion later on one of these podcasts about Cleanroom recovery.
Yeah.
And this is an environment that doesn't exist until you need it. Yeah. So if you need to practice a forest recovery once a quarter, Cleanroom's a great place to do that.
Got it.
Now, you're not going to take that to production, but it gives you a great place to learn your steps, learn your muscle memory. A customer a few weeks ago asked me, said, if we do the solution with Commvault, how do we know it's going to work? I was like, well, you're going to do it every Friday.
Right.
Why wouldn't it work when you need it on Monday? So it's not a concept of wait till you need to push the button and push the button. Because you've done it over and over again. Yeah. And it's a simple process by just simply executing the automated scripts that take everything from building the operating system out of a clean OS, or recovering from a system state backup, or a DC promo recovery, and then executing those 150 steps along the way.
It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. Practice makes perfect.
It does.
That's true in IT as well as everywhere else.
It does. And, your organization will evolve, situations will change. So when you practice, you'll identify those changes. Like maybe you added some structure to your Active Directory that you missed out on your recovery. It's a great place to point that out.
So tell us about, I know this is a really active part of our roadmap at Commvault. There's a lot of engineering effort going into this area of our product. Tell us about the sort of latest and greatest features that we're applying to your latest code.
Sure, just between us.
Just between us.
Just between
Nobody's
us.
Listening.
Yes, the latest and greatest, we've just introduced Clean OS recovery, which is a great step forward in the world of forest recovery, because we're not bringing over any residual OSs, none of that part of the existing operating system. Now, Commvault had ways to take care of that anyway, but this is going to be a clean OS with Active Directory on top of it. So you don't have to worry about, well, if you had saved things on the domain controllers, that's a bad idea, but you're going to bring over just a brand new Active Directory domain controller to do that. The other side of that is we're going to bring in the very near future, Active Directory assessments. When your backups run, say it's daily, it's going to gather information about your directory and say, you've created vulnerabilities in these 5 areas, and here's what you need to do to resolve those vulnerabilities. So it's going to be right there in your face. And with that information, the chances of you needing to do a forced recovery are much less.
Right.
And then we'll have real-time Active Directory auditing in near future as well. We're going to be talking about that later this afternoon in one of the sessions, where if somebody changes your directory in a certain way, you're going to have the ability to roll it back based on either your backups or the existing data.
And we've been hearing at the conference this week about Unity, the Unity platform, the latest release, and you mentioned the idea that this is compelling because it's part of a platform, it's part of the general sort of Commvault approach. But now we're bringing security, identity, and protection, and recovery all together. Talk a little bit about that and what that means to somebody that worries about Active Directory every day.
Well, from a Commvault perspective, we're using the data, the backup and recovery of the data, really just the backup, as a choke point for data, whether that's file systems, virtual machines, M365, Salesforce, as a point to analyze the data and make decisions based on the information that you have. Gathering the information is almost pointless if you can't use it to make decisions, right? So, it's sort of like the pilot telling you you're going to be flying at 35,000 feet. Like, I don't know what I do with that information. But telling me that, we're going to be going to the wrong airport, I might want to get off the plane. Yeah. So based on the information we're gathering in these analysis of the data coming through the backup system, we're going to be able to analyze and give you real-time insight on your data.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've been speaking to actually CISOs and CTOs, this week in New York around what this means in context, which is, I've got under one pane of glass, I've got the ability to think about Active Directory in the way that we've described, my corporate data, my applications, wherever they might be, cloud, hybrid, on-prem. And so to have a single platform managing all of that, plus my governance, is pretty compelling. Right. We focus, because I come from this world on AD, but let's talk a little bit about Entra ID. Just explain, where does that fit? How do things extend into that world for us?
So most organizations, everybody has Active Directory. Let's just say that. I can say probably 95% of the organizations have Active Directory. Most of those organizations also have Entra ID because they have M365. So they're hosting their SharePoint, their mail, their Teams, all in M365. So Entra ID is the directory service behind that. Again, 95% of those organizations synchronize that data in Entra ID from their on-prem Active Directory. So on-prem Active Directory is the authoritative source for most of those identities. So that's synchronizing into Entra and giving users access to cloud-based applications. I am seeing a very slow shift of organizations realizing that they don't need user objects or user entities and identities on-prem, right, and just moving to just an Entra identity. So for instance, a large retail customer, maybe they have 25,000 employees, maybe only 5,000 of those work in an office where they need to access the printers and the shares and things like that, old school stuff. The rest of them just need to authenticate to cloud-based applications. It's a great place to store Entra. Right. So they can have Entra-only objects. But with Entra comes some complexities, right? Well, first off, there's no forced recovery for Entra. That's not a concept. It's not possible. It's object and attribute level recovery. The users, since they're synchronizing from on-prem or maybe another identity provider or something like that, recovering the objects it's good, but it's not absolutely critical. But the important parts are the configurations. So conditional access policies, your enterprise applications that give users access to SaaS applications, that's what you really need to focus on recovering there.
Right, makes sense. So let's change gear, come out a little while. I want to paint an awful picture for you. We've just been compromised. The organization's down. Clearly, AD is going to be one of the first things I turn to recover. Without that, I've got no users, I've got no identities, no privileges. Just talk us through, at a high level, what that recovery process would look like.
So what I've found is when an organization, when I'm looking at their DR plans or their CR plans, they're inadvertently using Active Directory to recover Active Directory. And it's a strange concept. It's one of those palm to the forehead moments. So when you go to execute your cyber recovery plan, the first thing you do is you try to log onto your control plane, whether it's Commvault or something else. Most of the time, that authenticator into the control plane is an Active Directory credential. So you can't use Active Directory to recover Active Directory. Or the server you're doing it on is domain joined.
Right.
Not going to be there. So you have to take that into account. Once you get to that point where you're going to recover your Active Directory, there's a lot of work to be done. If you were in the right mindset ahead of time, that work's going to be a little bit simpler because you've designed for recovery. In a Commvault world, it's going to be like I said, you would listen to Dan and you would recover to an isolated recovery environment after you've taken a breath and realized, to do this right, I need an extra hour to do this. Look at my minimum viable Active Directory recovery to see how I've been compromised and analyze that. Even go so far as to compare backups. That's one thing that Commvault offers that other people don't, is we can take a point in time from a backup, say 3 months ago, of the objects and attribute in Active Directory and compare it to the live environment if it still exists, or to the backup you took yesterday to see what the changes are. Did somebody gain elevated privileges? Were group policies changed and things like that?
Right.
So in our session this afternoon, we're going to show the way an attack chain would work for an Active Directory, and rolling back a group policy that was linked to the top that applied a malware package is really what we're focused on from that perspective. And being able to use the data resilience or the recovery process of an object or an attribute to eliminate an attack chain.
So you've touched on a couple, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about the features of Commvault specifically that you're most excited about somebody that helps people recover Active Directory all the time. What are the things in Commvault, the features, the functions, the product differentiators that really make us different?
I've been at Commvault just a little over a year now, and I'm still, granted, I've been doing nothing but Active Directory for 25 years, but when I push that button and do a forced recovery, it's pretty cool.
Right.
Things are moving, and it's not an illusion. Things are moving.
Right.
Things are running simultaneously. Domain controllers are being spun up and provisioned in the back end. So, for instance, the demo environment that I've created, at kickoff, it's a multi-tree, multi-child forest, fairly complex architecture, but the way it recovers is pretty amazing.
Right.
It spins up 5 domain controllers immediately because there's 5 domains in 2 different trees. After that, it circles back and it runs all the forest recovery processes, things like seizing the FSMA roles, raising the RID pool. But it's an interactive runbook. You're watching it happen right in front of you. So if you want to get involved, you can get involved. You can pause the process. You can take a step. If you really like part of the forest recovery, something very obscure like raising the RID pool, that's your thing. You can pause it right there, log on to a domain controller, open up ADSI edit, find the attribute, open Windows Calculator, paste the number in, add 100,000 to it, paste it back. If you like that complicated process, you can do that as part of our runbook, and then come over and hit continue. And it's an interactive runbook. We call it the human in the loop. You're watching it happen right in front of you, and you can see all of the processes executing either in series or at the same time, because many of them will fire off in it. Parallelization is what we call it. So.
Amazing. I know that the demos that we do to prospects out there and with our partners, create a lot of excitement, and you can see why, right?
And to their credit, we make it look cool, right? So when you do the forest recovery and you take the most elaborate recovery scenario and it just starts raining domain controllers, it's a pretty amazing process.
Yeah. So let's step back from the technology slightly. If I think about people, process, and technology as they pertain to recovery and clean recovery and recovery that the business can be confident in, what are the sort of critical success factors there across those three?
Well, from an Active Directory perspective, I like to identify minimum viable. As I mentioned, the organization that brought that to our attention, and they decided that 8 domain controllers was their minimum viable. It was a great step forward.
Yeah.
Because in the world of Active Directory recovery, getting to the discovering minimum viable, identifying it, and then once you get over that hump, like you've recovered your minimum viable, 90% of the pressure's off. The directory's there. Maybe I don't have all the domain controllers yet. Maybe there's a user on the other side of the world that's having trouble authenticating. But for the most part, you're in pretty good shape. But that's identifying the people get involved in that. Where do I need my domain controllers? The people that understand their own directory service, the legacy people, like me, the legacy people in the organization. And then getting the process in place, and then even the politics that go behind that. So when you've outlined the people and the processes, you need to stick to those plans and realize they could possibly change based on scenarios. Yeah. But for the most part, you're going to be right on target if you have a plan and you've practiced it.
Yeah, and let's close by talking about that practice, right? Testing. I love this idea of testing with chaos because I've been exposed to breach. I know what that feels like. It's emotional. Your brain's racing. There's fingers pointing all over the place. All the things that you thought you could do suddenly feel like they're really more complicated than
Right.
they should be. So talk us about the best practices for testing, for practice. What are the technologies we can use? What can we apply in our own organization to practice well?
Well, yeah, just injecting that level of chaos. So when you look at a recovery plan, or even when you're practicing a recovery plan, when I hit this button, what if the thing that connects to doesn't exist anymore? Just pull the rug out from under it. And that'll get you in the process of building even redundancy in your own mindset. Like, how am I going to do this? And, I've lived through some major outages and, my time in the U.S. military and things like that. And it wasn't about the technology. It was about the creativity of the people. Just the wheels are starting turning. And I remember some of the most creative recoveries we went through were not pretty,
right.
But at the end of the day, it came back, and for the most part, the users were unaware anything even happened.
Right.
Not saying that's going to happen with Active Directory, but it's going to be, based on your flexibility, your knowledge of your own organization, the recovery plan that you've designed as a team, and your ability to adjust when chaos happens.
And I love the idea that the more we practice, the better we get. And as we bed down processes, there's the ability to then automate those processes.
Exactly.
So, we see all too often in IT things being automated before the process is ready. So that's another benefit of the practice.
Right.
So Dan, as expected, we're out of time. Thank you so much for spending time with us. So much deep knowledge and content there. Hopefully the audience can take that away with them. But thanks very much for being with us.
Appreciate it, Darren. Thanks.
If today's conversation has got you thinking about your own Active Directory and its recovery plan, or how quickly you could bounce back from a compromise, please visit commvault.com AD Exposed. You'll find practical guidelines and tools on how to automate, orchestrate and test your AD or Entra ID recovery with Commvault.cloud. It's everything you need to turn what could be a meltdown into a fast and confident recovery. Thanks for tuning in.